want to start?
Good morning, everyone. This is David Feakes from the Parents Estate Planning Law Firm, and welcome to our pep talk. Why a pep talk? Estate planning is a hard topic to talk about, and people avoid it for that reason. So pep talk really has two meanings. One is parents estate planning. That's the pep part. The other part is that through a pep talk, like a football coach on Sunday, I can kind of help you to approach the game in a different way, with a different feeling, a little more excited to get things taken care of. So here's what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to spend some time just kind of going through the three things, and I would argue a fourth thing that should be part of every plan for your family. And then I want to take a deep dive into the guardianship piece of things, which is always the first question that parents with young kids have about estate planning, is how do I make sure my kids are well cared for? We're doing this informally. The idea of doing this informally came from an informal presentation that I did at the home of a client not too long ago, and I found that sitting in a small intimate group in someone's living room and family room was an easy way to introduce this topic, to talk about estate planning. And so this morning I wanted to bring you into my home, so welcome to my home, to talk about this topic. The first thing to know, and the first thing I want to talk about, is basically the three parts, and as I said, I would argue there's even a fourth part to every estate plan. There's really three sub plans. First of all, there's a plan for your children. So every estate plan needs to have a plan for your children if your children are under the age of 18, if they're still young. The second part is a plan for everything that you own: your house, your bank accounts, your retirement accounts, your life insurance. And the third part is really a plan for you, because the reality is that you may not die. And the first two parts of the plan are really about what happens if you die. The third part of the plan is what happens if you don't die. If you're alive but incapacitated and you need someone to make decisions for you, whether those are healthcare or legal or financial decisions. So that's the third part of the plan. I would argue, as I said before, that there's really a fourth part of every estate plan. And in our firm, we really dig into that fourth part. And that's what I would call a legacy plan. And that is the recognition that we all walk around with assets that don't show up in a traditional three-part estate plan, because they are intangible things. They are not our house. They're not our bank accounts. They are the stories we want to leave behind. They are the guidance that we want to pass on to our kids. It's the memories that we want to share with our family. And those are the kinds of things that often get missed. So that I would argue that that's a really important part of the plan as well. This morning, I wanted to spend most of my time focused on guardianship for your kids. And even within guardianship, I want to spend a lot of time talking about things that are not so obvious to not only most families, not only to most parents, but even to most estate planning attorneys. So when we're talking about guardianship for your kids, we're really answering the question, if something happens to me, or if something happens to me and my spouse, who's going to take care of our kids? Who's going to raise them, who's going to love them, who's going to guide them until they are all legal adults, 18, and no longer in need of a formal legal guardian. And most people start off thinking about that question by answering the question, what happens if I die? Who is going to raise my kids? And that's long-term guardianship. And most parents are thinking about that even from the moment their first child is born. Now, they may not know what to do about it or how to get started with the planning around it. And obviously, that's what we're here for. But they have the idea of long-term guardianship. The pieces that parents are often not thinking about are things like, if my long-term guardians, or if my family members, or if just the person I want to take care of my kids is not immediately available, what's going to happen in that period of time until they are available? And if there's somebody in my family that I know that I don't want to be the guardian of my kids under any circumstances, how can I make sure that that person doesn't inadvertently end up taking care of my kids? Both of those pieces of the plan, when we work with our clients, how we fit that piece in, it was all started with what was going on in my own family. So the first piece, what happens if your guardians are not immediately available? In our office, we solve this by helping our clients identify what we refer to as short-term guardians or first responders. All of this started because my sister, my brother-in-law, who were the long-term guardians for my kids when they were still young, lived about 2.5 hours away in Connecticut. And one night, my wife, Paul, and I were out on a date night, and our kids were home with our teenage babysitter, our regular teenage babysitter, great kid, wonderful babysitter, took great care of our kids, but she was I think at the time she was either 16 or 17 years old. And Paul and I were coming home, I think it was from dinner and a movie, and we were thinking about what would happen if we got in a car accident. And what would happen if a police officer showed up on our doorstep and our babysitter opened the door and there was a police officer on the other side knowing that something had happened to us. We realized during that conversation that our wonderful babysitter, reliable babysitter, had no idea who our long-term guardians were, didn't know it was my sister, my brother-in-law, didn't know to contact my sister, my brother-in-law. And in any event, even if she did know that, my sister, my brother-in-law were 2.5 hours away. And I realized, of course, as the estate planning lawyer, that that created a huge problem. The problem is that if that scenario ever took place and our babysitter didn't know what to do, the police were most likely, almost guaranteed, were going to call in the Department of Children and Families. At that time, it was known as DSS in Massachusetts, but now DCF. And a DCF caseworker was going to show up at our house and take our kids from our home, both of our daughters from our home, and they were going to be placed in the hands of strangers. And as we talked that through in that car ride home, Paul and I just decided, as most parents would decide, that can't happen. We cannot allow that to happen, because knowing how upsetting and confusing that would be for our daughters in an already upsetting and confusing time, we said we can't let that happen. So it was my job as the estate planning lawyer to figure out how to make that not happen. And I did that. And I built that into our plan for my family. And then I got busy building it into the plans of all of our clients. And it's one of the reasons, excuse me, that we're out in the community teaching on a regular basis so that parents understand that this is a question they need to ask for themselves. So that's one of the reasons I'm sharing it with you today, because that is a question you need to ask for yourself if you are the parent of minor children. And the answer to that question is as simple as looking around at the people who live close to where you live. And if your family members or if your long-term guardian is not one of the people who live right around where you live, because let's face it, mom and dad don't always live next door to us, you want to think about people who live close to you, who you know and trust, who your kids know and trust, and who could come over and be with your kids on a short-term basis until your long-term guardians could arrive. That's what Paul and I did for our family. Once we thought about it, we realized that there was 5 people within 5 minutes of our house who could come right over, including our neighbors right down the street, who our kids had grown up with since we all moved into the neighborhood. And that became part of our plan. The other thing that people don't think about when they're planning, and most traditional estate planning lawyers never help you to think about this either, is that there may be somebody who is close to you in your immediate family that you know you don't want to take care of your kids. And again, this was part of our story. This was part of my story. So Paul and I had someone in our life who really wasn't in our life, but it was someone who was close to us in terms of family and in terms of relationship to us, that we knew we didn't want to be, it couldn't be the guardian of our children under any circumstances, because this person had no relationship with our children, didn't really have a relationship with us anymore, had never met our children, but it was somebody that under some circumstances a probate court judge could have looked at and said, this seems like a logical person to be the guardian of our children. And we knew we couldn't let that happen. So we created what we called an exclusion of guardian. And again, we started with our family, and then we built it into the plans of our clients as well. And it was just a simple document that said, this is a person who can't be the guardian of our kids. This is why this person can't be the guardian of our kids. We created that document, we signed it, we tucked it away in our binder, hoping it would never see the light of day. It did never see the light of day. We don't need guardians for our kids anymore because my youngest daughter just turned 18. But we knew that if anything ever happened to us, that this person could not ever become the guardians of our kids. And what I've discovered in working with hundreds of families with young kids is that a lot of people have that situation going on in their own family. Maybe their parents are too old. Maybe their siblings are not old enough or not in the right place. Maybe there's someone in their family who has a substance abuse problem, or they just don't like the way that person is parenting their own children. Whatever the reason, I would say close to 50% of our clients have got this document in their own plan. And again, that would have never been part of the plan of any of our clients if that was not something that Paul and I realized we needed to have for our own family. So for us, all of these kind of unique pieces started as filling a gap in our own plan that we realized was a gap in a lot of other people's plans. And then we could create the pieces, and it was really all part of our kids protection plan, create these pieces that we knew that other people needed as well. So that's why you need to work with somebody. If you are working with an estate planning lawyer, you need to work with somebody who works with families with young kids. If you go to your parents' estate planning lawyer, you will get your parents' estate plan. And why your parents' estate plan won't work really well for you is because your parents' estate plan isn't worried about young kids and isn't worried about managing assets until your kids are old enough. But when your kids are young, they can't take care of themselves. They can't manage assets themselves. And so you've got to do the planning around that as well. So you always want to be focused on working with somebody who has lots of experience working with young families. And of course, in our office, that's one of our primary focuses is, and always has been, is working with families with young kids and creating these unique pieces that those families really need to have in their plan. So those are the things I wanted to share with you today. I suspect there's going to be some questions that are coming in, and I want to take a look at those questions and get those questions answered. Before we get to that, I just wanted to share kind of a couple more things with you. Number one, as I said, we had great experience doing a small gathering kind of workshop in that client's living room. And if you would like to do that yourself, if you have a group that you can gather together, whether it's your book group or a family network or just a mom's group or a dad's group, whatever it is, or just kind of a neighborhood group, and you'd like to get some people together in your living room, in your family room, there can be wine, it can be relatively informal and what I would say non-threatening. So this is an easy way to help to introduce the topic of estate planning for young families, just in a more informal setting. If you're interested in doing that, I'd like to do more of these because I find they're a really effective way to kind of share this information with families. You can just reach out to our office. You can email support@parentsesstateplanning.com, parents with an S, support@parentsesstateplanning.com. So if you're interested in that, reach out to us. If you are ready to get started with your planning and you just kind of needed one little push across the goal line, you can reach out to support@parentsesstateplanning, and our client services coordinator, Lori, can help you to get set up and tell you about next steps and what you could expect. And if you have any questions beyond today, just reach out to us at support@parentsesstateplanning.com and we can answer questions for you at any time. So I want to move on to questions that are coming in. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat box. How do you find the chat box? If you kind of squiggle, for me, if I squiggle my mouse and you get a bar that shows up at the bottom of your Zoom meeting, you'll see one of those things says chat. Just click on that chat bubble and you should be able, and the chat bar will come up at somewhere, and at the bottom you can just type a message. So go ahead and hit some questions. If we don't get questions, we'll hang out for a little while just to give you time to do that. And just mostly we're just hanging out on a morning.
Chat's only available during the live, so if you're watching the replay.
Oh, somebody's telling me that the chat is only available if you are live, and we are recording this to be shared with those of you who could not join us live this morning. So if you have a question, you won't be able to do it through the chat box on the recording, and so just shoot us an email at support@parentsestate-planning.com. But if you're live with us this morning and you're sipping on your coffee while you've been listening, hit that chat box and we'll see what we got.
So we do have a question.
So a question is coming in. What do we do if we can't decide on who should be guardians? Great question, and this is one that I see a lot, and I saw it just last week. I had prospective clients in the office who were really stuck on this. Sometimes there's not an obvious candidate. The clients that I was working with last week, one of the spouses was an only child, and the other spouse only had one sibling, and there were issues, and parents weren't a good fit, and siblings weren't a good fit. And the answer is, well, here's the short answer. Number one, that I can just tell you from experience, and I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients over the years, no one has ever left our office who wanted to name guardians for their kids who couldn't name guardians for their kids. So I just want to share that with you at the outset. But I recognize that a lot of parents run up against that wall. And when you hit that wall, you tend to retreat and fall back. And for a lot of parents, that's why the planning doesn't get done. Sometimes it's looking beyond the obvious candidates. Everyone has the tendency to think that a close family member should be the guardians of their kids because, you know, a lot of us are raised with the story that family takes care of family and nobody but family can take care of our kids. But then when you look around in your family, you discover that there isn't anybody in your family who you want to take care of your kids. And the answer is sometimes you need to look outside your family, and sometimes the best people to take care of your kids are not family members at all. Sometimes they're your really good friends. But again, there's always someone. And I always say to clients, you've got to start where you are, working with the tools that you have at hand. And sometimes that means naming guardians right now, and better people are going to come along in a few years. So you start where you are. And if, you know, your parents are good for right now, but they're in their 70s, and you know they're going to age out of the role because your kids are, you know, 1, 3, and 5, and you don't think your parents are going to be able to handle your kids deep into their 80s or early 90s, that's okay. Start with your parents and know that as time goes on, the plan can be modified, the plan can be changed, and somebody else is going to show up in your life who's going to be a good candidate. Almost always that's going to happen. You don't have to create the perfect plan. You don't have to create the plan for the next 18 years. This isn't a forever plan. The idea of estate planning is you get to come back and change it and modify it as circumstances change. And so you start where you are right now. When I work with clients who are really bumping up against this wall, we have a kind of a cool process that I walk clients through that really helps them to get clarity around who they want to be their guardians and makes that process easier. So if you're bumping up against that issue, and I know a lot of parents do, just know that there's a way through it. Just know that there's a way through it. Another question has come in: how long does estate planning as a process take? It's different with different lawyers. I can tell you in our office, because we work so much with families with young kids, and because we recognize that you don't have a lot of time and you want this to be as easy as possible, that we have streamlined a process that makes it easy as possible. Basically, in our office, from the moment you come in and we help you to get really clear about where you are and where you want to be, you make the decision, yes, I want to get a plan in place. Yes, David, you and your firm are a great fit for us. Let's get started. From that moment, and once we get into the design of it in that first meeting, 4 weeks later, we're going to have a plan ready for you to sign. So within a month, you're coming back in, signing documents, and when you walk out of that signing meeting, you know you've got a plan in place. Now you can rest easy. The whole process itself in our office takes 8 weeks beginning to end. because we want to make it as streamlined as possible. We want to make it as easy as possible for you. We want to consolidate the meetings as much as we can. So initial meeting to signing meeting, 4 weeks, you know you've got the plan in place. And then we schedule one final meeting 4 weeks after that, and you are done. One other question has come in. I mentioned legacy planning earlier, and why I think this is an important part of the planning, and part of the planning that my wife and I have done for our daughters. In our office, this is what legacy planning looks like. It is, and it can go a couple of ways. It can be written. You can write stories, memories, guidance, all of the things that you want to leave behind for your kids, for guardians, about how you want your kids to be raised. You can write guidance for, trustees about how you want money to be managed for the benefit of your kids. What experiences do you want your kids to have? Should they get a car when they're 17? In our office, we do this a little bit differently. We do it through what we call our Family Wealth Legacy Interview. It's a recorded interview. It's part of every planning level in our office. So every client who comes into our office has the opportunity to do this, and most do, and most find it the most empowering, I would say, 45 minutes they ever spend with us or on estate planning. And what we do is we sit down, and using a series of questions, we get you to share what you love about your kids, what's so great about them, what makes you proud to be their parents, what are the lessons and insights you want to leave behind for them, what's the guidance you want to leave behind for them, who you chose as guardians, why you chose those people, what's important about education, what's important about managing the money, holidays, celebrations, traditions, what's important for your family, what do you want your kids to continue, and then all the things that you just want to share with your kids. It's an awesome process. I get to do this with clients, not always on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. I've done this, I don't know, a couple hundred times, and every time I get something out of it. I love doing it. I learn things about being a father. I learn things about being a spouse. I learn things about being a brother. I learn things about being a son myself. My wife Paul and I did ours about 7 years ago. We probably getting ready to update it now because the kids are 7 years older. They were preteens when we started. It was this was the coolest. It took us 45 minutes. It was the coolest 45 minutes I've ever spent talking about my daughters with a colleague of ours who helped us to record it. And every once in a while, I still pull the recording out and listen. Mostly now because I know I want to think about the things I want to pass on to them now that they're becoming adults and making their own way in the world. So that was the last of the questions that we had in the chat. Again, if you're listening to this after the fact, just email support@parentsestate-planning.com. Any other questions that you have, support@parentsestate-planning.com. If you just have questions, if you want to get started with your own planning, or if you would like to invite some friends into your living room or family room and have somebody from our office come and talk about estate planning, we would love to do that for you. So thanks everybody for joining us today. I appreciate you hanging out. If you're hanging out in your pajamas, thanks for hanging out with us. I know it was fun to do this, and thanks for coming into my home for a little while. And I was glad that we could share this with you. And I look forward to talking with you very, very soon. Take care, everybody.